gain an edge, but also by her summon monsters, and also by the monsters your player fights by, like, you know, Marlboro, I guess. And this is a dubious honor that's not afforded to Rosa to the same degree. It's always Rydia who gets this, and not Rosa. And I think this pornographic treatment isn't merely a result of Rydia's sexy costume or Rule 34, however, but there's also an air of innocence and a whiff of child in a woman's body about her that invite male protection and exploitation. Also, while Cecil and Kane are portrayed as undergoing emotional trials on the road to character development, Rydia has an almost complete lack of interiority. We don't know what she's thinking. We don't know what she's feeling. If she ever faces any doubt over her ability, or if she ever, you know, experiences any conflict over the fact that Cecil killed her entire family, we don't know about it. She's magical, she's mystical, she's unknown. She's a blank slate in an appealing costume onto which the ostensibly male player can project his desires and fantasies regarding an exotic and mysterious femininity. Moreover, although Rydia's magic is undeniably powerful because of the game's strict MP limitations, she's never really more than a supporting character. In the vast majority of battles, something that unfortunately also applies to Rosa. So in both the gameplay and the narrative aspects of Final Fantasy IV, female characters are associated with magic, innate ability, dependence on men, and cheerful self-sacrifice, while male characters are associated with physical power, training and skill, and development towards emotional independence. The player is strongly encouraged to identify with the male characters in their personal struggles. The male is the subject, the female is the object. We've heard this story before, I think. The male is known and powerful, the woman is unknown and mystical. And there are many, and these are popular fantasy tropes that we see again and again, and they're not unique to Final Fantasy IV, but I think Final Fantasy IV is appealing precisely because it makes effective use of these tropes, sexist implications aside. I think it can be further argued that all of the characters in the Final Fantasy series are amalgamations of popular character tropes. And Final Fantasy VII is no exception. So one of the most important and popular characters from that series, Eris, comes dangerously close to many of the various tropes identified with Amerisu. And before you throw any fruit at me, I'm not saying that she is Amerisu, but that the tropes are very similar. Let me give you a list. So the short paragraph of text in the game's manual describes her as mysteriously beautiful. She has an exotic name. She has an unusual and dramatic backstory. She's exceptionally talented in a wide variety of areas. She possesses rare powers. She's the last of her race. And all of the game's characters, even the markedly antisocial ones, adore her. She's brave, she's cheerful, she's incorruptible, she's too pure for this earth. She sacrifices herself to save everyone, and her only flaws, innocence, stubbornness, and naivete, are far from damning. Again, I'm not trying to suggest that she is a Marisu, or even a canon Su, or even that a Marisu character is a bad thing. What I am trying to suggest is that the character receives a very sympathetic portrayal and occasionally seems too good to be true. So no matter how close Eris comes to a Marisu, however, she can never be a true Su, as she is neither a writer nor a reader stand-in. That particular role belongs to Cloud, a confused and lonely young man who just happens to have a bigger sword than anybody else. Seriously, look at that sword. It's difficult not to sympathize with Cloud as he runs up endless flights of stairs. He snowboards, he rides a huge motorcycle, he spends so many hours breeding chocobos. He discovers his forgotten past. He's able to achieve his revenge on the psychopath who torched his hometown, and he's fangirled by everyone from Tifa to Vincent to Sid to Barrett. At his core, though, Cloud is emotionally vulnerable, and he just needs someone to comfort and understand him, right? That someone for the first half of the game is Eris. So, unless the player is armed with a cheat sheet of awkward answers to awkward questions, the game sets Eris up to be Cloud's love interest. Her many attractive qualities serve to make her, okay, spoiler alert, right? attractive qualities serve to make her death more dramatic, but they also serve to make her a more attractive partner for the player protagonist. In this sense, she's what I might call a male-created Mary Sue. She's not everything that the player wants to be, but rather everyone that the player wants to be with. She's the perfect romantic partner, someone who's strong and kind and beautiful, but still unconditionally attracted to the dorky male hero. So is the strength of such a female character truly empowering when it only serves to bolster the ego and libido of the player protagonist? Actually, quite a few female players have declared that yes, it is empowering. Overrated though it may or may not be, Final Fantasy VII brought an extraordinary number of new players to the series. So many of these new players were female. I was one of them, and although we can now say in 2011 that it's misleading to think of the majority of video game players as male, I really think that in 1997, when Final Fantasy VII was released in the early days of the PlayStation console, that stereotype wasn't so far from the truth. So female players were attracted to the game both by the burgeoning mainstream popularity of gaming associated with the PlayStation, but also by the presence of strong female characters who are more than guns and boobs on a stick. And I don't have a picture of Lara Croft, but that's, you know, in the early days of the series, that's kind of, it was disappointing. So many female characters in my generation, at least, grew up with Aeris and Tifa, and we saw these characters as much more than Cloud's love interests. We saw them as real people with real personalities, or at least I did. And we also saw them as role models in a way that I think would have been difficult with the extremely limited dialogue of early characters like Rydia. So my own personal, I guess, approach towards Tifa is that I thought she was kind of awesome. I saw a woman who kicked ass and ran her own bar and had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of lines of dialogue, and I identified with her. I liked her. I was 14, and when I looked at her, even despite, you know, this very graphic, you know, ending sequence where we're looking up her skirt, at her victory stretch, you know, at the end of every battle, I didn't really see her portrayal as sexist. I just saw her as awesome. And so what I've tried to argue is that female gamers brought with them, I guess, the antidote, maybe, to the male gaze, which is the gaze looking up her skirt. They brought with them the existence of a female gaze, women looking at women and seeing not sexual objects, but seeing actual, real people. So part of this female gaze that came along with Final Fantasy VII was not just, I guess, the real personization of female characters, but it was also the fetishization of male characters. This coincided with the internet, I guess. I guess we are talking about 1997 here. So along with female characters came the internet. Along with the internet came the female gaze. So the female gaze is problematic because fetishization is lots of fun, but it's also problematic in the same way that looking up Tifa's skirt is problematic. But despite these problems, is fetishization necessarily such a bad thing? So speaking of fetishization, when we look at Fran from Final Fantasy XII, I think the first thing that jumps to mind, if not Bunny Girl, is fetish character. So she's tall, she's beautiful, she has bunny ears, and she's not wearing very much clothing. And the clothing that she is wearing is black leather bondage gear. Yes, that's what it is. So she's marked as exotic not only by her rabbit ears, but also by her Icelandic accent. That's what it is, right? She's kind of a Bjork type, I think. So she has bunny ears, an exotic accent, and she has a different skin tone than many of the other humanoid characters in the game. So it seems that if there were ever a character that were designed solely for heterosexual male viewing pleasure, Fran would be that character. I don't think Final Fantasy XII's characterization of her is in any way sexist, however. And before I explain why, let me This is kind of scary, but let me explain why I think her characterization isn't racist. Although it's very easy to jump to the facile conclusion that Fran is just another example of a hyper-sexualized black woman, I'm gonna put myself out on a limb and say that I don't think that's the case. The most significant counter-argument against this claim actually is that Fran isn't black, at least not in the sense that being black in America has very strong cultural and historical overtones. Okay, I can never pronounce this correctly, Ivalice. All right. In Ivalice, the fantasy world that Fran inhabits, there are many races of people with whom the player has extensive contact, and none of these races are distinguished by stereotypes. For example, I think the Vulcans and Klingons are in the Star Trek universe. To give an example, the Banga are a type of bipedal, lizard-like people with floppy puppy dog ears. I think they're cute. But some of them are bounty hunters, some of them are merchants, some of them are traders, and some of them are mechanics. Some of them are vicious and cruel, and some of them are pleasant and kind, some of them are intelligent, some of them are stupid, some of them have red skin, some of them have blue skin, some of them have green skin. You get the picture, right? They're not characterized by a stereotype. Fran's race, the Vieira, I think, are the same. Although they all have rabbit ears, different individuals have different color eyes, skin, ears, hair, and so on. While some of them dress in skimpy clothing, some of them don't. While some of them live in the forest like mystical rabbit healer, elf ninjas, or whatever they're supposed to be, others don't. While some are wise and bound to nature, some aren't. So the fantasy world of Ivalice is a pan-cultural diaspora in the truest sense of the word, and one of the primary themes of the game is that homeland and people are extremely problematic. We can't make any generalizations. So while Fran may be exotic, then I don't think the game's portrayal of her is racist, and I don't think it's particularly sexist either. So as I mentioned earlier, the Vieira are a diverse race of people. Even though the race seems to have originated in a highly wooded area and has developed ears to hear the semi-magical voice of the woods, or whatever, many female Vieira don't live in the woods, and that makes the equation between woman and magic and woman and nature difficult, especially in the case of Fran, who's an airship mechanic and pilot. Moreover, even though the player may fetishize Fran, and it's not hard, I don't think Final Fantasy XII really does. So not only is she significantly older and more mature than the other playable characters, but she's the object of no one's sexual attraction, and even her relationship with her male partner Valthier is characterized as friendly yet professional, to my dismay. So I think the game makes it hard to draw sexist I think the game makes it hard to draw sexist conclusions based on any of its female characters. For example, Ash, the character around whom the game's plot revolves, is a princess, but she's less concerned with teenage love stories than she is with political strategy, international alliances, and the consequences of the use of weapons of mass destruction. Ash comes pre-equipped with a sword, but if the player decides to make her a spellcaster, there aren't any consequences. Likewise, although Fran comes pre-equipped with a bow, if the party wants to make her a two-handed weapon-wielding tank of a melee fighter, there's no problem with that. As in many earlier games in the Final Fantasy series, such as Final Fantasy III, Final Fantasy V, Final Fantasy VII, Final Fantasy VIII, I think gender bears no relevance to fighting ability, which is nice. In Final Fantasy XII in particular, the sphere grid, which is how you build players' abilities, does not differ from player to player to player, where the base stats, oh, this is so geeky, okay. The base stats are determined not by the character and the character's gender, but rather by the equipment the character equips, and this is also not gender specific. In other words, I don't think there's anything about Fran's character or fighting capacity that's innate to her race or to her gender, save perhaps her revealing costume, but to give her credit, if she can fight in those heels, then my hat is off to her. And also, I feel that the clothing of the game's two other female characters, Ash and Penelo, is similarly revealing, but you know what? So too is the clothing of the three male characters. Does anybody remember, have most people played this game?
Yeah,
awesome. If you haven't played the game, I was resistant to it at first, but it's totally worth it. So there's a scene in which Captain Bosch von Rosenberg of Dalmasca, right, is shirtless, almost pantsless, and strung up, you know, in a very revealing pose and total prison bondage rape fantasy. So this brings me to an important twist in my argument about the fetishization and sexism inherent in the female characters of Final Fantasy, which is, are the depictions of the male characters not fetishized and sexist in exactly the same way? I tend to think that as the series goes on, when the female gaze becomes stronger, when there are more and more female players, I think that yes, indeed, the male characters do become more and more fetishized. So this is Balthier from Final Fantasy XII. I myself have a bit of a crush on him, and why not? He has an accent. He has tight leather pants. He can do anything, whether it's sky pirating or airship piloting or, you know, becoming the youngest, you know, a judicial administrator in the evil empire. If there's anything to do in this fantasy world, Balthier can do it better than anyone else and look good doing it. Is he fetishized? Yes, he's fetishized. And I think that's, as a female player, I think that's wonderful. The way that the female gaze handles Balthier, first of all, is things like this, right? And while we may say that Slash is homophobic, Slash is extraordinarily heteronormative, in that we have a Uke, we have a Seme, we have a male role, we have a female role, I think that queering the text in this way is perhaps a step in the right direction of breaking down gender roles. And certainly I think each successive Final Fantasy encourages this queering of the text by giving us these highly fetishized male characters to go along with our highly fetishized female characters. Despite the physical fetishization of these characters, however, I do believe that characters, especially female characters, are becoming much more developed. For example, in Final Fantasy X, the main character perhaps is not Tidus, but is Yuna. The story is her story, despite what Tidus may or may not say at the beginning of the game. He's just kind of along for the ride. I think Final Fantasy X2, despite our female characters spinning around while they pulled Sailor Moon-esque transformation sequences, really the game is about the girl. And I like this. Strong female characters are good. So I'm going to suggest a fantasy trope, not as men as fighters, women as mages, men as physical power, women as magical power, men as known, men as subject, and women as unknown, women as object. Let's get rid of those tropes, and let's think instead of you know, the trope of awesome. This is a weird graphic to illustrate it. But the trope of awesome is that both male characters and female characters, despite physical fetishization, this is a fantasy game, series of games after all, despite physical fetishization, can be fully developed characters who are attractive to both sexes. And so, therefore, I do think that with each successive game, this phallocentric, male-centered gaze has gotten weaker.